This podcast is brought to you by Infrastructure Masons, uniting builders for the digital future. The podcast you're about to listen to features a panel of experts hosted by the iMasons Innovation Committee and attended by our members. We're making this content freely available for everyone's benefit. If you'd like to join future discussions and ask your questions live, become a member today at imasons.org/community/members. Enjoy the conversation.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody, and welcome to our fourth and final panel of the Q4 series. I'm saying final. We'll do another one in December with a slightly different slant on it. But today, I'd love to bring in leaders in data center operators and innovators to talk about something that's a little bit different to some of the more technical aspects that we've been looking at. And we'll be exploring one of the recurring topics that the Innovation Committee have had, which is around data center by the people for the people. So emission risings, rule tightenings, are data center compliance ready? Before we move on to the introductions and the panelists, I'd like to do a bit of housekeeping. Well, first of all, would love to hear from you. So if you are listening today and you want to comment, basically announce maybe who you are, where you're from, there is a chat feature in this live chat where you can actually put questions forward to our panelists. Feel free to use that feature as we go through and as you want to react to some of the answers. As you put your thoughts, we'll bring all the questions on the screens and we'll try our panelists to answer it. This is the way we make it fun for everybody. The other thing is, we'd like you to keep the comments respectful and on topic, please. This is, I want to say family friendly, but this is something that is open to everyone. We'd like to make everybody feel welcome. So please remain respectful in the comments. Finally, the session is being recorded. It will be available to rewatch later on. So if you missed anything or you want to re-listen to it, don't worry at all. It will be actually available through our podcast, and you will be notified when it will come out. Now, before we go ahead, the first thing I would like to do is to bring you a bit up to date with what we're going to be talking about. We know the digital infrastructure industry is entering a new era of accountability. High growth, loads of resources being used. So regulators such as the SEC's climate disclosure rule, the EU CSRD and CSDDD demand detailed reporting on environment and social impacts, far beyond traditional metrics like power usage effectiveness. And at the same time, the challenge is intensifying. So forecasts for Goldman Sachs warns that the data center emissions could more than double by 2030, putting many operators off track for their net zero commitments. Customers and investors are watching closely, basing decisions on credible, transparent reporting. Weak and inconsistent data is no longer just a compliance risk. It threatens contracts, investments, and trust. So this panel will explore how operators can keep pace with fast evolving regulations, close reporting gaps, and turn compliance from burden into a differentiator in the eyes of the customers, regulator, and society. So with that in mind, I would love to bring all of our panelists on the podcast today. First of all, Martin Reed from CBRE, Global Energy Sustainability Director. Hi, Martin.
Hey there, how are you doing? Good to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, and welcome to the panel. Chris Pennington, Director of Energy and Sustainability for Iron Mountain Data Centers.
Cheers. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Chris. And Maximilian Whitehall, co-founder and CEO of Clear Decisions. Welcome to the panel, Maximilian.
Hello, everyone. Hello, community around the world.
All right. Well, let's get diving straight away, right? We know that many operators don't have yet the data required for CSRD and CSDDD, which is all European side regulation and compliance. We'd love to dive straight into the concrete steps that companies must take to now prepare, and maybe what the risks are if they wait to be ready for those for that compliance. Anyone want to get started on that one?
I mean, happy to make a start, kick us off. So I think maybe generally speaking, I think the CSRD and CSDDD, I mean, there are only two elements, right? Two regulatory frameworks of the many regulatory requirements that perhaps circle the industry on a wider scale. And I think it all, in the end, ties back to one of the 5 Ps of iMasons, the perception challenge which the industry is obviously is facing. And I think what, at the end of the day, these frameworks do is create an incentive to build out that trust infrastructure for operators. So how can you set actually the systems and data structures in order to quantify your externalities and build trust across your different stakeholders, regulators being of course one of them. And when it comes to that, I think a lot in operators, any operator really, it will come down to leadership setting the goal of certain outcomes, goals to achieve, setting the timelines for that, and then operationalizing them. And when it comes to these specific frameworks, at the end of the day, it's important to define your boundaries. Start with the methodologies you're looking to follow. And when it comes to greenhouse gases, I think the ISO 14064 is the, I'd say, key standards for that credibility of your data. And starting early, looking at these standards, looking at building alignment within the organization, to then structure your methodology, structure your processes, and then capture the data, which then gets you to that point.
Yeah, I'll just maybe build on that a little bit as an operator in the space, working in both the North American and European markets and Asia Pacific. It's clear that operationalizing that is valuable. So, putting in consistent practices across the global portfolio kind of enables that to be more efficient. So we go through and have put a lot of work into 50,001 and 14,001 certifications for the global portfolio. And what we found initially is like that benefited us because that enabled us to kind of respond like, yep, check in the box, we have that program in place. And so that kind of like accelerated our ability to comply, I think, with a lot of initial questions that were coming out both from customers and regulators. And as the footprint grows, we're going to show up in more and more communities, have a bigger and bigger presence. So I think when it comes to being able to be responsive to reporting requirements, there's 2 aspects of it. One is to get engaged in the process and policy making as much as possible on the front end. So it gives you line of sight to what may be coming down the road. We're certainly working a lot on policy in the US right now, especially around the electric utility regulation, but also like the work the EU DCA does with the Climate Data Center Pact. So I think those work groups are really valuable to kind of get engaged and say what's coming, and then be prepared to operationalize that. And that does require some investment for sure, metering, resources, people, but at the end of the day, like this is going to be the enabler that allows us to keep growing, I think.
Yeah, I think if I build on that, actually, that's a great example, Chris. I think if you can bring it into your operations, that is perfect. It's not a compliance piece. And usually I've had to deal with compliance for the last 15 years. And it is interesting when you look under the bonnet, what you know and what you don't know. And then if you bring it up to a leadership level, how important are the things that you don't know? And how much of a risk, and if the market changes, I mean, a lot of the regulation that you have If you have a core good set of data that you understand that's consistent, it is quite straightforward to actually do your compliance. But then you need to understand, okay, well, what are we doing in terms of F-gas that will change over the next few years? What are we doing in terms of X and Y? And it makes it far, far easier, because if you suddenly have a change in legislation, you have to rush doing it. It's not a particularly nice experience. So if you can embrace what it stands for, then hopefully you'll be able to help your business be a bit more resilient and less reactive.
It's very interesting to hear from the different perspective, and just to place different things here, right? So Chris, your company is actually operating owner-operator of data centers. So great to have your viewpoint. Martin, from a CBRE perspective, you provide all the services to actually outsource the operations of data centers. Which again, I mean, and having spent a few years in some of those teams, tap into very different aspects of data center operations. And Maximilian's your software solutions and services enable to track and manage the compliance. I wanted to bring that forward, not as a way of like pointing all the end user towards you, and maybe it does, but really to place your different views on how you're going to shape the different answers that you got today. So hopefully that helps everybody who's listening to shape that a little bit more. Martin, you're talking about elevating those metrics, what you know, what you don't, off to senior leadership, and then figuring out from that point onward what is the true value of those things. Another group of stakeholders are on the customer end, and they are asking today to figure out exactly, they're asking through RFPs, what do you do? Where is it coming from? And not just in terms of like being able to tick the box, but they're trying to ask for the trust factor that is coming from those metrics. Can you guys just unpack that for us? Is there, well, first of all, where's that thing coming from? Are customers just asking just because, or is there other elements to it? And also, how do you build the trust factors around the elements that you give them?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I think from what I can see, because obviously we provide the FM services to data center customers, and we're fortunate enough to work with a broad variety of customers. Almost every single one of the RFPs, the SLAs that have come through in recent months have said things such as you must be compliant with ISO 14001. Some are stating we have to be signed up to science-based targets, or that we have to, large hyperscalers asked us to be signatories of the climate pledge, which we already were for a few years. And my understanding, and I bow to Chris's opinion on this as a data center operator, is you may close off your market if you don't have these certifications, badges. If this approach, you might suddenly need it, or you might not be able to work with certain companies. And if you suddenly got a fantastic contract, but you needed to get a certification, it could be months or years away, and you're just not prepared. So it's a big competitive advantage. And I think most of the major companies seem to be pushing the boundaries to try to be more responsible, because the data center industry is in the media more than it ever has been at the moment. So I think it just helps you enable to be on the front foot. So yeah, Chris, could you get anything to add there?
Yeah, I sense that our largest customers are really starting to recognize, as their footprint at third-party data centers grows, that like this really does need to be folded into how they look at their entire portfolio of real estate and operations. So it is no longer, to the extent it ever was, it is no longer kind of this thing that's out there that they have this space that they lease that's not part of, not on the radar screen. So I think that they probably, I suspect that they are increasingly looking at the third-party space the same way they look at their own built facilities, and expecting it to achieve similar performance, have similar certifications. And it is all about a combination of risk mitigation, but also achieving corporate goals. So the big footprint that's out there in leased data centers is a big lever to actually help achieve those commitments and compliance that they're being held to, or potentially create friction and create risk. with data center space in such high demand and vacancy rates so incredibly low, it's actually really good to see that the largest customers are still setting a very high bar for how they're leasing new space. So I know I've certainly seen it on the RFPs that come through for the new space that we're leasing, whereas the initial questions, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, were focused around, do you buy clean energy? Then they became like, well, how do you buy clean energy? And now it's like, well, do you have green building certifications? What about refrigerant tracking? What about, waste? Do you have these programs in place? Or do you have, ISO 50000, 14001 programs? So the questions have gotten much more robust, as I'm sure a lot of the audience is also seeing as well. I think that's positive, though. That's helping us make sure that we're collectively delivering really great solutions.
Yeah. Maximilian, let me just point another side question to that one. So we're talking about those questions through RFPs from client, trying to build the trust through the RFPs. For somebody who tracks compliance for a living, is it only seen at the RFP level? Do you see those requirements continuing well beyond the RFP stage with the same level of accuracy, demand, and I would say intensity is what when the whole requirement starts?
I would say definitely yes. I mean, it's I think, as Chris has already pointed out, I mean, it's the questions, of course, are getting more complex, but at the same time, I think the awareness of data centers and their communications is becoming it's becoming critical. I mean, you have to be careful not, I think, with the growing sophistication you have in the market amongst all the stakeholders, that the claims you make are correct, that the definitions are in line with the standards, and that you basically from bottom up, from your company policies through to your data, and then in the end what you report follows a consistent trail and follows standards, follows requirements that the market understands. And for that, you really, the challenge with that, with the obviously number of requirements increasing, in fact, we start a radar just to track all the regulatory changes for UK data center operators, to really be aware of these changes that are happening, to be on the forefront of them, on the front foot, to be able to create that documentation, to have that ready at your fingertips when your clients require it, when your investors ask for it, and then be able, I think, to continuously optimize on top of that. And I think that's what the next phase really is, where clients as well will require to see then evidence of continuous improvements. In fact, you're already, as part of RFPs, being asked, if in case you don't actually comply in certain ways, that you have to work towards those goals, and then obviously provide the evidence when you get there. So yeah, that has increased, I think, in the sophistication massively.
We have discussed just before coming on the call, amongst the four of us, that actually rules and regulations are different in different geographies, and with some geographies like the EU being far more advanced. Now, but what's interesting is international companies are saying, well, we'll take the hardest one of them all, probably the EU, and we'll apply it across the world because it's just the way it goes. So that way they've got standardized reporting everywhere. Now, the question I want to put to the panel is, should the rest of the industry follow their lead to avoid duplication? And what challenges would this create for smaller players, for example?
Yeah, we definitely took that approach. So from the standpoint of adopting some preliminary targets that are universal across the global portfolio, we look to the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact as kind of like a way to establish some initial baseline targets that we could use globally. And I think that served us well, because when it comes to like talking, so what is your target for PUE? We had a third party kind of reference to say we're gonna align with this established benchmark over here. So it wasn't just us kind of pulling numbers out of the air and saying, well, we think this is a good target. It was meant to be, our performance goals were meant to be reflective of what the industry recognized was a prudent target to set. And PUE is one thing, and WUE is another thing that actually like it really helps to have a third party kind of consensus that says, this is really what a good target should be. So I think referencing these established benchmarks that are external to the organization has helped us and kind of served us well in kind of having discussions with customers that are sitting in our portfolios globally. And it also helped us to not have a bunch of different targets out there, quite frankly. Now, that's going to naturally evolve because as the EED rolls out and different countries may adopt different specific targets, in Germany, for example, we'll naturally have to align with the local requirements. But at least it served us well as a baseline. And is a small operator at a disadvantage in doing that? No, I think that it's becoming table stakes. And also, just one more quick thought on the kind of the aspect of differentiation by market. One of our goals also is to construct all new facilities to achieve BREEAM green building certifications. Now, this has also served us well because it's helping us identify opportunities to make buildings higher performance and lower impact. And yet, as we emerge into new markets, like BREEAM just doesn't really support us there. So we've had to recently kind of like put a comment in there and say, or local equivalent. So as we expand in the Asia Pacific regions, for example, or India, like there might be a different green building standard, but the key is to have a target green building standard or like a benchmark, and then find ways from there to kind of personalize it for individual country conditions, I think.
Yeah, I think picking up on there, the consistency is key, because then at least you're comparing apples to apples. And I think what we've perhaps seen on our side, because we often have to provide the data that our customers would have to provide for compliance. And if you term the question in the right manner, you can actually end up fixing things. So we can't give you that data. Well, why? We haven't got this, or we don't have that, or we don't have quality metering, and maybe the markets are completely different. The water market, the gas market, the metering system. Okay, great. Well, you may need some investment, and then you will be able to have that, and you will be able to report in the same manner, and then you can build it in operationally, and suddenly there's a lot more benefits, and the team don't feel like they're being they're lagging behind. They feel like they're getting supported. And then obviously the central teams get that consistency as well. So you can try to improve things, because I think compliance often brings up a bit of a negative connotation of it's going to be a lot of work, and at the end of it we just get our box ticked and we wonder what we're going to get out of the end of this process. So yeah, it can be interesting to ask those questions.
I would maybe just add one more point to it. I think one point which you just made, Martin, the rigor that following these standards brings is, I think, can be a huge benefit also for smaller operators. I mean, it's really stepping up the way you think about your operations, and obviously not every smaller operator has to comply with all the same standards as and follow the entire T of the CSRD from the start. You can set a baseline, be rigorous in your approach, and then you can, however, still find ways to innovate on top of that. Use that rigor to find new ways to show off your credentials, you build your trust in your market. For instance, you see smaller operators innovating on heat reuse. Here in Europe, for instance, which is a whole new space of metrics, and which, if you can master that rigor in your regular methodologies and processes, you can extend that to new innovative ways of showing off.
I think linking both those points very quickly as well, is if you're entering new markets, as Chris said, if you are a smaller operator and you get things right at the end, you don't go through that route which companies often do, where they've got to retrospectively try to make everything consistent across the estate as they're trying to expand as well. So it's good to get on the front foot.
There's definitely a theme here that as regulations are coming in, they require reporting. Reporting leads to more data gathering that needs to happen, which also means potentially additional burden on all the operations teams, which are already, as we know, as we're lacking an amount of talent in the industry, already a little bit stretched. And so maybe the question I'd like to ask is there any ways that we can better integrate that day-to-day reporting requirements into what the operations teams are doing, so that it doesn't have the reverse effect, or maybe it doesn't remove or increase the issues that we're seeing in the fact that we've got a lack of talent, for example?
Yeah, I think sorry, go on,
ahead,
Chris.
Sure, I'll jump in there. I just think the systems that having the systems in place to capture that data efficiently is super critical. We operate a very lean team. There's increasing requirements to report. So I'll just say that it is imperative to have the metering in place, the systems in place, the dashboards in place, the data in place. Because as we look at just the increasing expectations to report for regulatory purposes or customer purposes, like access to that data is becoming not only more and more frequent that we have to access it, but I also think, going back to the statement around rigor, that the results are being viewed at the same level of criticality as our financial statements. So it's not so much like your sustainability metrics are nice and reporting them is a nice thing to do. It's like these are regulatory requirements and need to have the same level of rigor and review as our financial statements do, from my perspective. So it is not to be taken lightly.
No. If you make it easy to spot what's not there or not correct, then that is a huge weight off. I've been reading a couple of the ESG reports of major colos, and one specifically said, we have robust data, and now we need to try to automate collection and improve quality assurance automatically. And certainly by giving the operational teams the absolute accountability for electric and water, as two examples, for instance, and you report it on a daily, hopefully half-hourly basis, etc., you'll know if it's not there. You'll know if it's not right, and you won't be waiting until the end of the year. You will know it very, very quickly if you've got a problem. So you will very rarely get to the end of the year and have a big gap. If you give accountability to those teams to look after it, they don't need to worry about the carbon. That's what we need to do. But if they can get that data, it's simple. And since my arrival in the role a few months ago, nearly a year now, I think the way that people set up data is quite robust, but there's very simple ways that you can highlight where something isn't wrong. So if you expect a number to be 100 every month and it is lower or higher, you can have very, very simple ways to just show you where your problems are. And that somehow seems to be a bit of a gap that many people are missing. So make it easy for yourself.
I mean, touch as well on what we do at Clear Decisions, our whole value proposition. Thanks, Martin, on that. Helping bring that transparency in easy. Our system, with the help of AI, helps screen your documentation, identify issues in it, identify gaps in it to the different standards, and then helps you in an easy way to continuously improve and update your documentation, your metrics, to then build up that stack without you having to do it all manually yourself, but purely with the help of AI. And just on that point, maybe a little little cheeky comment. I mean, on the point of AI, since when is it a bad idea to have a lot of good data? So for the industry, I think for everyone to aim for having excellent data of their performance and being able to utilize that for their own improvements, but even beyond that in the future training models. I think there's it's becoming increasingly clear that there's a lot of value in creating that. We have to do it today. That's the whole purpose, I think, of the models we're building.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I'm really excited about that we've deployed recently and are still rolling out is it comes to how we understand what the embodied carbon is of the facilities that we're creating. Like let's recognize the fact that the physical footprint of data centers is probably going to double in the next 5 years or somewhere on that level of magnitude. So like the buildings that we construct are increasingly an important piece of how we talk about the sustainability of the industry. And within the buildings we construct, those are all made up of materials, and those materials have carbon footprints. And in achieving our green building certifications, we've always had to do an LCA on that building. And the problem with that is that's typically like a snapshot in time. It's like, oh, well, the LCA on that design of a building is this. Okay, that's informative. And yet what gets built isn't always what was designed. And so I'm just super excited about this technology we're piloting now, where the LCA can be captured, almost instantaneously off construction drawings and materials lists versus kind of the old approach that was much more labor intensive. So now we can run that LCA through the entire construction process, design and construction process for that site, and say, okay, we need to make this change to the building. Fine. What's that impact from a carbon standpoint? Did it actually improve it, or did it make it worse? And to be able to capture all of that across the portfolio as buildings are being built simultaneously and see it through one kind of lens and say, oh, that building actually is getting better results than this one over here. Like this just that access to your point, Maximilian, like more data is actually a good thing because it's going to help us identify opportunities, make changes, see the results, and talk about it and report publicly on it.
Yeah. So amazing conversations. Don't want to break up the flow, but if you've got more questions, put them in the chat. Actually, I just want to bring in a first question that came in from Tom. So talking about California and the requirements, or I would say regulators basically saying, oh, if you use if you're a high energy user like a data center, we'll ask you to meet specific carbon targets. It says, well, it seems like an expensive compliance effort. Any opinion on if that will actually happen, and will many jurisdictions follow that?
Well, I'll start off here and recognize the fact that one of the things that we didn't talk about so far is the upcoming change to the greenhouse gas protocol. And so what this question or statement kind of triggers in my mind is the recognition that many of us and many companies generally have these commitments to 100% clean energy. And as the GHG protocol gets updated to reflect what will likely be a more granular accounting for hour by hour emissions, I think the requirements to be 100% clean energy, like for example, some cities and counties and jurisdictions are prescribing a pursuit towards 100%. All of that's going to have to shift and become kind of more based upon the granular accounting of where we're actually at today. That's probably not going to be 100%. So like things are going to change, I guess, is the kind of the point here. So when it comes to requirements for low carbon power, as an example, I think that landscape is just going to change dramatically over the next 3 years. So what might seem like doable today probably is impossible tomorrow, but we'll have to figure out a way to actually still do something.
Yeah, it is a challenge. I understand where your point is coming from, Tom, and I think back from my experience years ago, we had a long conversation internally at a different company at CBRE about how we would look to do offsite PPAs, and it took about 3 years to get to the tender. And we did a fairly hefty tender, not quite a terawatt hour a year, but close. We ended up saving 15% on the power because of the way that we structured the portfolio. And it was almost like a light bulb moment internally, because suddenly our treasury team and our board realized if you did it correctly, it might be an enabler, and it was a cost saver, and it put us in a fantastic position. And we did it for the UK and Ireland, and then we replicated that across Europe and the Asia businesses as well. So we'd actually budgeted in for a 20% increase. I think the market today is very different. And I think when you look at what's happened with the prices of carbon credits, etc., I do think that's something that needs some sensible thought, because obviously the prices have gone up hugely, and we shouldn't add unnecessary burden, because there may be a move to other jurisdictions that maybe don't have those cost pressures put on them, which has been happening as well. So I think directionally it's a good thing to do, but I think I would recommend hold your ground and have solid reasoning about the way that you are going to deploy your strategy, because you don't always need to meet every single goal if it is going to be very, very cost prohibitive, and then just try to engage with your auditors, lobby, as I think Chris mentioned as well, because you shouldn't be priced out of a particular market.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up a second question from Alan that was talking about the role of carbon offsets and what are the trends, what is working and need to be improved. As you were just mentioning the words, I thought I'll put it on the screen.
Yeah. I'll obviously, for sake of variety, I'll hand over in a moment. At one point, and I don't know what the answer is to this one. One point I've been made abundantly aware of in the last 2 weeks is, if you sign up to science-based targets, you can't do carbon offsets, and that seems very interesting to me, especially when you have hyperscalers asking you to sign up to carbon pledge that will require offsets. We are discussing what we should do in terms of offsets. That's the reason we've not moved, because we don't know if the market is going to recognize it as being authentic, and that's a blocker. And I said, I don't have an answer. I just think that needs to change. I don't know if anybody has any views on that, but it seems a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, I do think that there'll be some continued evolution with some of the frameworks that are out there, like SBTI. We have a science-based target that's approved. We have a net zero commitment, and we're in a place today that's not net zero, right? So like we have a point of departure and a point of arrival that we're going to have to try and figure out how to get there. And I think by the time we make further progress, the rules will continue to evolve. And so I think it is a somewhat fluid landscape, and that makes it tough to navigate. And so what we do is just we focus on finding ways for absolute emissions reduction still. So we don't go out and procure or source carbon offsets today. We're still kind of too busy trying to actually drive carbon out of the business. And so we've had great success in the power space, and now we're looking at lower carbon fuels, HVO, for the diesel generators, and having that be the new standards. Okay, yep, good progress being made there. Now we're looking at embodied carbon of our constructed facilities and finding ways to squeeze out carbon through better design. So we're in this point in time where, as the world around us is kind of continuing to evolve, well, can you use offsets or not use offsets? It's expensive. Why would you do it? We're just going to keep focusing on finding ways to squeeze carbon out for now.
So I'd like to move on and maybe a question more for Maximilian on that one. So we've talked about trust. We've talked about, can leadership, customers, or anybody that looks at the data that comes out trust, what is being said and how this is verified. I'd love to know. So how can companies demonstrate that their reported data from carbon emissions to supply chain risk, so that include third-party data coming into your reports, is accurate and reliable? And do you foresee maybe a third-party auditing becoming an industry norm?
I mean, firstly, I think third-party auditing, in a way, at least what I see, is the norm already to a large degree in many of the companies. I mean, going beyond data centers as well. And absolutely, I think you got to do two things. I think at the one hand side, you have to create your internal transparency. I think that's the very first, and you have to trust. Of course, you need to want to trust your own data. So you need to make sure you're again rigorous about setting it up and capturing the data, and you want to, at the end of the day, draw the right conclusions from it, make the right decisions, and they can be very, very costly. So there is, I think, a big motivation to be doing that internally. And at the end of the day, the third party, so tools like ours can help, of course, create that transparency. B, you will want that third party verification to give you the ultimate check on what you've done, that it's correct, because at the end of the day, you're dealing, again, as Chris said, with very, very sophisticated stakeholders, and you want to have that stamp, you want to have that approval, because in some cases, those stakeholders may not simply accept your data unless it is verified. So absolutely, you have to think about it as an end-to-end process, which requires that third-party eye on the results.
Yeah, I agree that transparency is the currency of trust, and so it's I think the third-party verification process is probably pretty consistently applied, I'm guessing, across most operators in the space today, in part because, as an example, our customers are operating inside our facilities, obviously. They're reporting their energy footprint inside our building as their scope 2 emissions. And so when we buy clean power for the site, they get the report that is 0 emissions. Okay, great construct. They have to really trust us that when we say we bought clean power, that we bought clean power. It's aligned to ISO 14064. It's real. And a third party said, yep, it's real. So I think increasingly our customers are reporting our performance in their results, and they're going to want to be very confident that what we're telling them is true.
Yeah, so very, very interesting from a data perspective, because at the end of the day, this is what it is, right? So we'll pick off data off of the sites, all of the operations, package it up for the next person to carry. But equally, a number of companies have been also promising, in a way, if I want to use that word, or at least telling everyone that they have targets for some of them 2030, 2035. And I think those ones were made before the AI boom, if I may say, where we thought, it's all right, we'll grow 10% year on year, we'll figure out a way to be carbon neutral by then. And then suddenly, the growth scale, the growth has been off the scale. And so now we hear analyst firms like Goldman Sachs saying, oh, by the way, carbon emissions will more than double for the industry as a whole by 2030. And that puts pretty much everybody at a bit of a risk, because we said we could do better. So I'd love to hear you comment on how companies should communicate this new reality to regulators, customers, investors, without really eroding trust that they've been so carefully building over time.
I think the market has changed. And I think, yes, you can be green, but if you're not in business, you can't be green. So you have to maintain a healthy profit and a healthy structure. I mean, it's very intriguing to me, because ultimately, I think if you're looking at the financial sector, there's been widely publicized reneging of the targets they've signed up to. I think consistently they seem to say we will be enabling the green transition. That will have a greater impact on what our emissions are. Now, that's a particular story. Okay, I won't go into that myself, but we need power, and the cheapest source of power is renewables. And obviously it is intermittent, with solar and wind largely being there, but we have obviously got battery storage that's becoming cheaper. This won't happen unless we get more clean power. And it's the cheapest source of power. It can create jobs in the industry. And I think the increase is absolutely colossal. I can't remember the IEA study, but it was basically, I think the power that it will grow in the data center industry alone would power Germany and France and Canada today. And that's just our industry. Forget electric vehicles, etc. So yes, you can have these promises, but if there's no way of achieving these things, then that's what we need to do. We need to help work with the grids to secure power. We need to try to find way to offsets, because we're never going to be able to operate without any carbon emissions. You need to offset. And then also find ways to just be very, very transparent and clear on how we do this, because I think getting towards net zero is quite straightforward. Getting to absolute net zero is incredibly challenging at the moment. So you've got to push it and highlight where the restrictions are.
Yeah, we have transitioned from an era of promises and pledges to an era of performance and progress. So I think to your question, Roman, how do you maintain kind of trust as your goals are more challenged than being achieved?
Yeah.
I think transparency is the key. So I think it's more important for us to demonstrate that we're looking for ways to innovate and find ways to make progress than it is that we've set a specific target personally.
I mean, companies are used to changing. I mean, progress is rarely linear, right? I mean, there's always disruptions, and sometimes you miss your financial targets, and it doesn't mean you're less credible. You lose credibility when you have no answer to the question of, okay, how to deal with that. That's when you get a real problem, or when you try to avoid saying there is a problem in the first place. So when you deal with it head on, and with a structured, scientific, or metrics-based approach, just like any good financial transition plan, the markets, if the market can understand it and it's credible, it's your way forward. And at the end of the day, again, you'll be measured against your performance in the future, but you have to that's why you have to Chris's point, I loved hearing that earlier, where he said, pulling out carbon wherever we can, or in very clear ways. I think it's exactly these types of narratives that help.
I'll invite all of our listeners today to just continue putting their questions on the panels. We've got about 10 minutes, and to be honest, probably not enough time for all of the things that we want to discuss. It's such an important topic. But let me put another angle to all this, right? We've talked about regulations and compliance, and actually the reporting of it becoming requirements from customers. What we haven't really talked about is how does that differentiate maybe one operator from another? Is there a view that actually we should look at regulations and compliance as a way to differentiate in the market, as opposed to simply just meeting the standards so that we can answer the different RFPs that are coming? And if yes, what does that look like?
What I see is, as you mentioned earlier, the questions are becoming much more specific and much more aligned with the regulations that are coming. Today, I see customers saying, do you have 50,001 aligned program in place? And if the answer is no, the follow-up question is, when will you do it? So it's not so much like, do you have all these nice things, but it's like, if you don't have it, when are you going to do it? So, I think it's hard to think of where like alignment with regulations is a differentiator. It just seems like it has to be table stakes. I think perhaps there's a period of time today where if you do have the right programs in place, you probably are a differentiated solution potentially. I mean, look, there's a ton that goes into space leasing, as I'm sure Martin knows very well. So the sustainability tab on the worksheet is like one tab out of 10. But I think increasingly, like that follow-up question, they're becoming more kind of key gating items for leasing space than perhaps it was before. I'm not sure that somebody's going to lease a space because of a great sustainability story today. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think that it could be a disqualifier for spaces in the future, more so than it has been in the past.
Yeah. I think transparency is key. It's being able to compare apples to apples, and that's the thing. I think one of probably a point I would raise now is if you look at PUE, whether we like it or not, it's quite a consistent method, and people report on it, and you know what 1.x looks like versus 1.y. If you look at the hyperscaler strategy in terms of water, you've got water stewardship, water replenishments, water management. They're all slightly different. I'm not commenting on which one's best. They're just not as consistent as the other things. And then you move on to waste as well, and how they're particular. So I've looked at about 8 or 9 different hypers, how their strategies are applied there, and it's not as consistent. And I have exactly the same view in how they look at renewables and the 24/7 matching. That's much simpler to compare, and you could rank them quite easily. So I think with more regulation and more consistency, it more helps define who are the leaders, who are the followers, and exactly how are you performing versus your competition and peers.
Is that also something that may be geographically or regionally specific? I mean, we know some regions are water scarce. We know some regions might have power constraints is pretty much everywhere, but some of them more than others. Some of them have got more specific skill set issues. Is there a view then that regulations have got to then adapt to the different scenarios because of the environment where those data centers are being built?
My opinion would be yes. I think, again, if you look at a data center in the north of Europe versus a data center in Asia Pacific, you can't achieve the same thing. So I think it needs to be the context, and quite how that comes out is quite challenging, because you go to particular areas and there's different styles, different designs within 10 square miles, let alone across countries. So I think adding in a bit more context about the style of cooling, the style of building, is it AI, is it more traditional, is it air cooled? Again, better data with context and understanding will help fairly evaluate how that site's running. And I believe somewhere I've seen on a webinar, if not the intro to this one, another one, it was about driving progress, and certainly trying to bring up people to a minimum standard, rather than trying to make people go from very, very good standard to exceptional. So yeah, it's unfair when there's criticism of just how things work in different geographies, depending on how humid they are or how humid they're not.
Brilliant.
I think there's an interesting point. So when you listen, for instance, to the UK government talking about how last year they designated data centers as critical national infrastructure in order to support the growth of the industry. And they're trying, well, I hear, very, very intensively to do that. And it obviously it's a very complex requirements for the government and for operators to fulfill. But part of the necessity out of that, if the government should support the industry driving high growth, the government will need some sort of, they call it proportional oversight, or some sort of regulation one way or the other, in order then to, I think, enable them that in providing that support. So I thought that was quite so in a way it is an evolving matter that is not necessarily there to, I think, hinder the industry, but enable, in fact, support for the industry. So I think that's important to keep in mind when it comes to regulation.
So I'd like to put one last question to our panelists and maybe a final comment. So compliance so far have been defined as something that is really setting the minimum that everybody should reach. And that minimum can be very high already. I'm not saying this is a low bar. I'm just saying this is setting a minimum. What opportunities exist for companies to go further? Is there areas where data center operators are already looking at that bar's not high enough, we need to go above and beyond because of our customers? And it doesn't have to be purely on metrics, but it can be on, providing better data, providing better reporting, better insights, driving different actions, and so on. What's the next step above and beyond the regulations?
Well, I think it's a great question for us. When we think about going beyond just kind of the minimum benchmarks that are out there, a lot of it starts to pull in how our facilities interact with the utility grids around them. Like, how can our buildings be good grid citizens, for example? And so we're deploying energy storage to help improve the reliability and resilience of the grids that we're connected to. So that's an example. I think about like the circular product conversations and how we're helping customers decommission data centers responsibly and bring value from those materials back to our customers and like recycle. So I think the opportunities to go above the benchmark isn't necessarily to take, to say we're got to get PUE down to 1.25 in Germany instead of 1.3 or whatever the EED recognized as the minimum. I think it's more about the products and the solutions and how our facilities themselves actually kind of fit within the communities they operate within is the opportunities for some pretty cool innovation.
No, I think you probably picked on a couple. We have picked on a couple of points. I would say I think the AI deployment, the AI boom, if you coin the phrase, it means that we're deploying a lot of equipment and we're probably replacing a lot of equipment. So the circular economy aspect looks like it's going to be something that the industry regulators will look at. And when they look at it, they will try to find a way to make it a bit more accountable. So we're certainly trying to make sure that we help our customers deal with that. But at the moment, there's not anything formal that you need to do. And I think from mentioning some of the things you're doing, Chris, with embodied carbon, that's good because you're already ahead, because you don't need to report it, but it's a good thing to do so because eventually you probably will need to do so. So you're seeing that risk in the future and you're acting already, but then it helps optimize your design. So you're reaping the benefits because you're jumping ahead of the curve. So there's a lot in it. I think the scope 3 elements is an intriguing piece I'll probably bring into it because there's so much double, triple, quadruple counting across there. And hopefully there'll be some understanding of the colossal amounts of data that we do collect, and also an understanding of how we can do it simply, how we can make sure we don't double count, for instance, because usually that is the lion's share of what our carbon is. So if you sorted out scope 1 and 2, how much more rigor is there going to be over your scope 3 data that is usually the most difficult to actually achieve? So where companies have really started to focus on how they achieve that, and maybe where their supply chain is weak, for instance, there's been quite a few conversations the last few months where they're saying, look, we're seeing you as a risk. How can we talk about this proactively? But this is not a red flag. This is an amber flag to say in the next 2 or 3 years, we would need to do something. Can we please have a constructive conversation? So I think those practices are very logical.
I mean, I think we're living in, as one is often reminded, in the most exciting time ever when it comes to optimization and innovation. So I think we are at the beginning very much of, I mean, of that journey of innovation and going beyond where we are today and what's required across so many dimensions. But just to say, again, with the right data, with the right oversight about where you are and what you do, that sets the foundation of coming up with inventive new ways to engage with communities, build your position and trust. It comes down to trust in the market.
Fantastic. Look, this is all the time we've got for, and I wanted to thank all of our panelists for all of their insight today. I would invite anybody that was listening today to actually go find them on LinkedIn to be able to connect and actually reach out if you want to. Well, simply discover what their firms do, what they do themselves, and continue the discussions if you feel a need for it. as for me, I wanted to bring up a couple of things. The first one is, please head to our events page, imasons.org/events. We've got 2 more events this year for the Innovation Committee. We've got a pitch competition, or Dragon's Den, in Dublin on the 20th. So again, that's going to be a very exciting thing where we invite participants to go and ask the tough questions to all of our pitching startups. And then we've got a final panel organized for the 11th of December, where we're going to unpack the entire year, everything we've done, and then show you what next year is going to look like. If you wish to reach out to me, if you've got any questions on the iMasons Innovation Committee, my email address is at the bottom, and so feel free to reach out and ask all the questions. But I will leave you with one last comment. John has said, and I will echo his sentiment, thank you very much for this terrific sessions to our 3 panelists and everybody in the audience today. And we will definitely find you again very, very soon. All right. Thanks very much, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Infrastructure Masons is a global, non-profit, professional association of individuals connected and empowered to build a greater digital future for all. If you too want access to networking events, forums, and summits that foster innovation and influence, register now and join the other 6,000 committed participants at imasons.org/membership application.